Hello, I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough. So, do you remember when it was the last time we talked about a SpongeBob board game on this show? Well, for those who don't, I looked at one of many original SpongeBob board games back in 2019. The game in question was Mattel's Bikini Bottom Beach Party, a simple but still very fun game based on the series. Much like I had brought up in that review, there are plenty of SpongeBob board games that fall into recreations of popular pre-existing titles, like Clue, Monopoly, Sorry, and even Hangman. But because the nostalgia market is huge these days, with millennials and older Zoomers who grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s, you know companies are just waiting to pick up and bring back some of these old favorites to cash in on. Case in point, look at my Teenage Robot U2's review from a couple months ago. And if you want another example, just look at what Funko Pop recently did with their new Ed, Edd n Eddy figures. This brings us to Hot Topic's latest edition, with their attempt at cashing in on SpongeBob with not one, but two board games, based on games that were featured in the show: The Flying Dutchman's Treasure Hunt and Eels Escalators. Made by Golden Bell Studios, a company that was started up in 2015. I admit, going into this, I didn't know much about the company, but from what I can tell, it seems they have a decent number of games in their arsenal, most of which I've never heard of or seen when I went shopping for games. But apparently they've also had plenty of other tie-ins to popular franchises, Nickelodeon included. But interestingly, Golden Bell also seems to have a certain history within the board game industry, specifically a lot of legal trouble. While researching them for this video, I found a ton of lawsuits they went through in regards to their games, and their Kickstarter campaigns were often cited as scams. A lot of this happened years ago, but I felt it needed to be addressed, as apparently they've garnered quite a reputation. Lawsuits from webcomic artists, reality TV personalities, and even people who've worked with them. But to focus more specifically on the games and less about the drama surrounding them, let's talk about two of their SpongeBob board games, that being Eels Escalators and The Flying Dutchman's Treasure Hunt. So these are the board games for Eels Escalators and Flying Dutchman's Treasure Hunt. I honestly like the front cover for the Flying Dutchman one a little more because it does look pretty much the same as it did in the original show, but with the added bonus of SpongeBob and Patrick being on there. And Eels Escalators, I mean, I guess you could say it's a throwback to one of those old board games where the cover is a group of people playing the game. I mean, kind of surprised they didn't try to make it a parody of like Chutes and Ladders, like with the cover, but I mean, it looks fine for what it is. The one thing that I noticed is that, and I've seen a lot of like cover art for games and movies and stuff do this, but I absolutely love the fact that they just used PNGs of the characters and just tried to like change a few things. They just adjusted their eyes to make it look like they're looking at the game. I don't know, something about that is just really funny to me. Gary needs a new pair of shoes. Win a pair for Gary and all of SpongeBob's friends in Eels and Escalators. Roll the dice and move across the board. Ride up the escalators to victory. Just don't slide down too many eels because you might lose, causing you to shout out that number 11 swear word. This wholesome board game can be as frustrating as it can be fun. Well, that's great when the game itself acknowledges that it can be frustrating. Classy sophisticates like you shouldn't stain your lips with cursing. Now, which one of you has a sailor mouth? Meanwhile, I like how on the back of the Flying Dutchman game they actually put the little plastic symbol for the treasure chest. Thought that was a nice addition. Plastic! The wind is perfect, the tide is right, let's hunt for treasure. Based on the real treasure map, it's the SpongeBob SquarePants Flying Dutchman's Treasure Hunt. The board game where it's one for all and maybe all for one. Roll the dice and move around the board searching for the treasure map clues to get to the X in the center of the board. Remember, the X marks the spot and that's where the treasure is buried. Look out, your fellow scallywag crewmates may betray you and leave you shanghaied by playing cards against you. So what are you waiting for, lads? Dig up some of the treasure and maybe you'll be lucky enough to win a few gold doubloons. Or will you be stuck with plastic? Alright, well they certainly leaned into the fan service. There's lots of in-jokes and references to the episodes and the actual games themselves. Like, there's tons of dialogue in there that was straight up ripped from the episode. And on the Eels and Escalators one, that Gary needs a new pair of shoes, that's straight up from the episode where they're playing Eels and Escalators.
Come on, Gary needs a new pair of shoes!
Okay, so we have an ad for the Flying Dutchman game in this one right here. We have instructions of how to put together the escalator staircases, which I already have that done, so no need to worry about that. And then on the back, here's like some minor instructions explaining how like certain pieces and certain dice and all that works. And then here is the actual instruction manual, and it's actually rather intricate with all the different modes and stuff. I mean, you think that's what that single piece of paper would be for, right? But no, there's like, they go into a whole spiel about the different modes and stuff and like different ways of playing. It's serious stuff. This one is even more so because, okay, yeah, you have the pieces of paper, the singular pieces of paper that explain stuff like this. Like this explains the dome and how to bury the treasure and all that. The dome is what covers the sand because, as you'll soon see, they actually give you real sand to work with instead of just making a plastic dome that simulates sand. So I'll give them that. That was actually a step outside the box. And then there's this piece of paper that's supposed to explain all the dice and all the cards. They have specific names for certain things, like the skull and crossbone cards are the green cards. And then you have the anchor cards, which are just sort of the main cards. And then look at this. Look at this. There's so much in this little manual. There's like so many pages. It's way thicker than the one for Eels and Escalators. This one, way thinner. Yeah, and it basically just goes down all of the different modes and all the different ways to play and all the different rules, and believe me, we're going to talk about that later. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's actually get these games set up. So once you get the boards all set up, how exactly do these games play? You know, assuming you haven't seen the characters play the games in either of the respective episodes they were featured in. Well, as for Eels and Escalators, the board certainly matches the show, and the overall gameplay is the same, but they also added plenty of differences. Like, for some reason, the eels are made out of cardboard and placed on the board instead of just being printed on. Also, there are 4 paths on the board instead of 2 like in the original show. More than likely, this was their attempt at trying to make the game longer and adding more spaces. Lastly, the mechanics are greatly expanded upon. In the original show, it was mostly just a race to the end of the board, with the winners climbing escalators and losers taking eels, all the way to the automatic you lose space. While all that is still technically here, they changed some things up to spice up the gameplay. Here, if you roll eels with a special dice, you have to ride eels backwards on the board to the nearest space, basically serving as a go back. They also added cards for players to look at throughout their turns, including Eels and Escalator cards, as well as Bikini Bottom cards and Sailor Mouth cards. These are typically pulled if you land on matching spaces on the board, though honestly, the cards didn't add a whole lot, aside from some minor setbacks, like move escalators forward 2 spaces, or move eels back 3 spaces, or players have to restart from the beginning. Is it challenging? Yes. Are they BS most of the time? Also yes. I honestly don't recommend playing with the cards unless you're looking for a longer version of the game. Just stick with the show mode as listed in the instruction manual. It mostly just comes down to rolling dice and moving spaces, but it's simple enough and generally kept my attention while I played with a group of friends. That pretty much does it for Eels and Escalators, but how exactly does the Flying Dutchman's treasure hunt game play out? The game plays out more like the original game in the episode. There are a few differences, notably the more difficult mode, as well as a little hourglass and some mini card games that are filled with in-jokes from specific SpongeBob episodes. But more or less, this is exactly what you'd expect from a Flying Dutchman treasure hunt game. The board perfectly replicates the board and the pieces. You get the cards when you land on certain spaces that match the symbols, and they give you tasks like sending one of your crewmates to the brig, or looking for the deacon's goose through the fork in the old tree. All the while, the winner gets to the center of the board and has to dig up a plastic treasure chest.
Aye, but it's based on a real treasure chest.
More so than Eels and Escalators, I feel like this game leans into the fan service, but I did also appreciate the simplistic gameplay. It gives the player some challenges that are easy to follow, and I can get behind a game that's a lot smoother to follow in that department. Out of the two, Eels and Escalators is a simpler game, but I would argue Treasure Hunt is a little more fun. The pirate aesthetic adds a lot of personality, and the challenges that come with the spaces and the cards definitely shake things up for the players. Eels and Escalators attempts to do that, and while it might appeal to some, I personally prefer the game when it's just a basic race to the end with the main point of it being avoid eels and getting sent back. Some might find it too basic, too short, or find the rules confusing, which believe me, when I first played this with my friend group, it definitely felt that way. The instruction manuals and some of the cards are nebulous and vague with certain rules. They really should have worked elements like that out. These games are far from great, but I also can't say they're the worst games I've ever played. I honestly dislike the Jumanji game that I reviewed last year because I felt that had less to offer in terms of gameplay and challenge. At most, maybe if you give this to your kids or your friends who are diehard SpongeBob fans, maybe they'll like it, but in all honesty, wait for the prices to go down. There's no reason that they needed to be this expensive upon release. I mean, these are board games we're talking about, not movie theaters. Even though I can't really say these are the worst games I've ever played or that I absolutely hated them, when it comes to SpongeBob board games, I think I'll just stick with SpongeBob Bikini Bottom Beach Party game instead. Well, until next time, I'm the Media Wiz, 'cause one art form wasn't enough.